Shalom everyone, my name is Jeffrey Scott Geenen, and my book review is dated April 10th, 2016. It is for class PHIL-3305, Philosophy and Christian Thought at the King's University. For my book review, I reviewed The Abolition of Man by C.S.Lewis, published by HarperCollins Publishing Incorporated, 1944. The ISBN number is 978-006-1949-135. Content Summary. In The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis begins his first section as Men Without Chests, and perhaps this is really Men Without Hearts. He describes in this section a book of grammar designed for, quote, the upper forms of schools, end quote, written by two authors fictitiously named Gaius and Titius. In his descriptions of what he calls the Green Book, he supposes that Gaius and Titius are making a philosophical argument about intrinsic value. The first example he uses, and the example I will use here, is that of a waterfall. When viewed, someone could say that the waterfall is beautiful, but this, according to the authors, would be a statement of feelings of beauty on the inside of the person. In other words, there is no such thing as intrinsic value, no thing, such as a waterfall, that warrants approving or disapproving emotions. To further illustrate his observations on this point, Lewis describes St. Augustine, Aristotle, and Plato. St. Augustine comments that everything is given a degree of intrinsic value, love, that is inherent to it. Aristotle claims that education results in the student learning intrinsic value to determine what is liked and disliked. Finally, Plato called the human animal as needing to be taught to feel pleasure, liking, disgust, and hatred at those things which really are pleasant, likable, disgusting, and hateful. Lewis continues to describe the overall objective truth as the Tao. If the Tao is known, then people, animals, and other objects would have an intrinsic value based on the overall truth and not in the moment emotions or feelings about such things. The book describes our feelings, or approvals and disapprovals, are recognitions of objective value or responses to an objective order. The point Lewis makes is that emotions can line up with reason or not line up with reason. Therefore, the heart should obey the head. This leads to the section titled Men Without Chests. The chest of man is the center of man's emotions by which the head rules the belly through the chest, the seat, as Ellenus tells us, of magnanimity of emotions organized by trained habit into stable sentiments. Lewis also puts it this way: the intellect rules the appetite through the heart or emotions of man. By reducing all intrinsic value to the subjective, untethered by the Tao, the Green Book produces Men Without Chests. In the second section of The Way, Lewis describes the purpose of the Green Book as attempting to cut away emotion, religion, and societal taboo so that real values may be recognized. For this, Lewis uses greater love hath no man. It makes the assumption that this sentiment is not the real value and that it is irrational. In his argument, he supposes that good is recognized as what is good for the community. In this case, the death of the community would be bad, but in its preservation, the death of some of its members would be good, useful, or necessary. However, by removing the intrinsic value of such things as pride, honor, shame, and love, there is no rational reason why anyone within themselves should desire to give up their lives for the community. At this point, to refuse to sacrifice oneself or to agree to it is equally irrational. The argument is made that societal preservation is instinctive. But if instincts are always followed, then the Tao becomes irrelevant and unnecessary. Yet, the instincts to preserve society come from the Tao, something not recognized in this argument. It must also be admitted that there are impulses that must be controlled, those that stand against societal preservation. In the final chapter, The Abolition of Man, Lewis talks about man's power over nature, which is revealed as power exercised by some men over other men with nature as its instrument. This is exemplified by understanding that every generation has power over the next generation, and so on. This is based on the current generation's modifications of the environment bequeathed to it and rebels against tradition, resists and limits the power of its predecessors. Lewis explains that machines, handed down to the next generation, steals power from them because they are preordained on how to use them. He compares eugenics to the power over posterity, and that this would certainly relieve us from tradition and make the current generation and the preceding generation weaker for it. The evaluation. Clive Staples Lewis was a scholar and prolific writer who lived from 1898 to 1963. Lewis was born in Belfast, Ireland on November 29th. Lewis graduated from Oxford University with a focus on literature and classic philosophy. While there, he received a fellowship teaching position at Magdalen College. While at the college, Lewis became part of a group of writers whose membership included Lewis's brother Warren and J.R.R. Tolkien. After struggling with the Christianity from his youth, his writers' group conversations brought him to re-embrace it. From these experiences, Lewis taught at the University of Oxford and became a Christian apologist through the use of logic and philosophy. C.S. Lewis died from heart trouble on November 22, 1963. Integration. I found The Abolition of Man very enlightening, and especially apropos in our modern world today. Although it is impossible to review every example and every thought in the book, I tried to highlight the ones that most caused me pause and consideration. The test for this was the moments when I would iterate sound from the deep parts of my vocal cords that indicated some level of contemplation. Kind of like, huh. The authors of the Green Book attempt to distinguish between facts and feelings, and the facts, in their estimation of things, are all things without intrinsic value. To judge anything is a mere feeling, and his thoughts or words are meaningless. Through the reading, C.S. Lewis uses examples that indicate the physical world has much in the way of intrinsic value. This objective intrinsic value is through human reasoning identified by Lewis as the head, intellect, belly, instinct, and chest, heart. For Lewis, the head ruled the instinct through the heart, and it is through the heart that men perceive the world. In Lewis's second section, I was confronted with a modern idea of objective truth, something Lewis previously mentioned as the Tao. Humanity must have an anchor, such as an objective truth, and without a Tao, there is no possibility of exercising or knowing a value judgment or truth. Even such intrinsic things, without Tao, is fallible. This is illustrated in the fact that Gaius and Titius write on a use of proper grammar. If instinct is right, then why is it necessary to make a value judgment about proper grammar? In this way, instinct cannot determine value. Finally, this discussion leads to man's ability to have power over nature. Although I have already said this in the previous section, I think it bears revisiting. Our conquering nature in the context of medicine is really a conquest of some men over other men. What this comes down to for me is the recognition that only mankind has the power given to him, and it is this power that ultimately rules over him. In order to have power over nature, men exchange resources and release their power to other men, only to be ruled by those men who now have been given the power by the men who had wished to conquer it to begin with. This leads to a conditioning, and future generations live in an enslaved state to the previous generational conditioning. But if the Tao is rejected, to what anchor is the conditioning attached? It is this concept of preserved posterity, generational planning, that conquers nature and rejects the Tao. Without the Tao, it is impossible to conquer nature, for what is chosen as the conditioning for the pinnacle generation. If there is no Tao, and subsequently there is no ought, then the conditioning is left to every pleasure of the mind, And this is the conquering of man by nature. Thank you for listening. I'd like to make just one note. In the portions that I quoted from the text, I did actually not say quote, end quote, because I thought that would take away from the reading of my paper. So anyway, have a blessed day. Thanks for listening. Blessings to you all.